it's the Spirit of the living God that gives life. And so I'm thankful today that God is alive. He's alive in you. He's alive in me. And he's still changing lives just as he changed you. If there's someone here this morning who's never experienced the life changer, Jesus Christ, he welcomes you to call upon him. And he said he would hear and answer. And so I pray that everyone here, under the sound of my voice this morning, I pray that you know him, but if you don't, that you will receive him into your heart and trust him with your life and walk according to his purpose and plan for your life. Loving Hands Ministries was born some 30 years ago in the Bradenton area. And my wife and I were pastoring a local church there. And God moved on my heart to do something a little different. And so we took a couple of young men into our home. And from there, we were able to eventually purchase a little house separate and begin a full program. So now we have 2 locations. One is in Bradenton, or Palmetto actually, and the other is in Dade City, which is Pasco County. And in addition to that, for 20 years now, we've had a ministry in the nation of India as an outreach, where we have an orphanage and a Bible college and seminary and a Christian school, and about 160 churches under our covering there. So we've seen God do some wonderful things in the past, but this is today, and he's still doing great things. I want to introduce to you our director. His name is Joe Hamblen, and he's going to come and share his testimony, have the other men share, and during the offertory, we'll have the men share a song with you. I think you'll be blessed by the testimonies and by, I think, their songs. Sometimes I wonder, but you know, when you look at these guys, you say, could they sing? But sure enough, something good comes out of there. So, amen. Isn't that right, Matt? Okay.
Good morning. How you doing? Everybody awake? Okay. Just checking. My name's Joe. I'm 28 years old. I'll start at as a youth. I was taken to church by my grandparents, but my mom and my dad they didn't walk out a Christian life in my home. They would take me to church to make Grandma happy. I would see this growing up as a young child. I would see and hear their conversations on Sunday mornings, and I could tell that if we don't go, Grandma's going to be mad. And so they didn't talk about Jesus at home. They didn't pray. We didn't pray at home. We didn't read the Bible together. So God to me was something that we did to make Grandma happy. And at the age of 12, when I was old enough to start rebelling, I continued to rebel really hard, and I said, I'm not going back to that church. I felt probably conviction, but the preacher was one time at the old Baptist church, and it looked like he was yelling at us grandkids, which were the troublemakers of the church. And it looked like he was yelling at us, believer, you're going to hell. And I got up and I walked out. I said, I won't go back in there. And I began getting into drugs and alcohol. Started with just smoking marijuana, and it slowly progressed. By the time I was 18, I met this drug called Oxycontin. And it became my favorite thing, the best thing I'd ever done. It was pretty expensive, but I felt great. And I used to always say, when people would ask why you do drugs, I just said I like the altered state of mind. And with that Oxycontin, if I could have one of those every single day, I would love life. Life would be perfect. Well, that's a deception. That's deception of the enemy, because as you go to take these prescription painkillers, you build a tolerance to them. You begin needing more and more. Then when they became $50 and $60 a pill, and I couldn't afford that so much, I began shooting up heroin because it was a lot cheaper and the high was better at first. And as an electrician, I would drive around. I had a car, and you had to drive to job sites. And anybody that knows anything about prescription painkillers, the side effect of overdosing or getting over the limit is you start nodding out. So I would be wrecking my car all the time. I would nod out in rush hour traffic in downtown Indianapolis and bounce off the concrete median. I would wake up in the morning, I would come outside at my mom's house, and I would come outside and my car would be totaled all down the side. I don't know what I did or how I made it home. And basically I had got to the point where I was a heathen. Society didn't need me. I was an outcast. I actually was a menace to society. And after finally getting arrested for drinking one time and then multiple arrests after that, I began to seek out some kind of help. I finally accepted the fact that I had a drug problem. Well, that was NA and AA programs there in the jail, and I went through inpatient programs. I would get out, I would go into halfway houses over and over. I would be 3 months, 6 months clean, and then sure enough would eventually fall off. I had no kind of mentorship. I had nothing but NA and AA. And I learned after many years of going through NA and AA that you're not going to get set free in NA and AA. See, the lie of NA and AA is that we battle an addiction. This is a disease that's incurable. But see, once I came to God, so therefore they battle. They battle with this forever, and they even teach recovery in their principles, as in you're going to relapse. Just know to come back when you relapse. And I learned finally, after going back to jail over and over and over, doing this NA and AA, seeing people that were in there 50 years old, that had been sober for 30 years, but were still angry and bitter. I knew there had to be a better way. And finally, after going back to jail over and over, I cried out. I said, God, there's got to be something. I know my life's got to have something to it. And God came into my life. He came into that jail supernaturally. It wasn't through a preacher leading me to an altar. It wasn't through a preacher preaching to me or saying a prayer. God supernaturally visited me there amongst all these criminals and convicts just as I was and did a work in my life. He changed my life that day. And since that day, I began seeking the Lord. I had everything had changed in me, and I began loving God. I didn't have any kind of mentorship, though. As I said, no one led me to the altar. I didn't have anybody to raise me up. There weren't pastors. My parents weren't godly. And I ended up eventually falling back into sin because I would go try to tell all my friends how to get off that Oxycontin, because it's become such an epidemic. And anybody that's actually hooked on Oxycontin, once they're hooked and they no longer are getting a buzz, but they're doing it just to survive and feel normal, they don't want to be in that state. And after going and trying to minister to my friends, I eventually would fall back, and I picked up and I left Indiana and I came to Florida, to where my grandma had now moved to, because I was the only Christian in my life, and I knew if I could get here, I could get off drugs. Well, I went to the bars thinking that drinking was okay because it's legal, and found myself in jail again multiple times. And finally, I saw Loving Hands Ministries on the stage at a church that my grandma had been taking me to. I went in there crying every weekend, Lord, you've set me free before. I know you can do it again. Please help me. And finally, Loving Hands one day showed up on stage. And I came in here. The program is very strong and it's very rigorous. I'm sure we'll have one of the men share with you a little bit about it. But it's a very rigorous program teaching you to die to yourself. Everything that you thought was a right is no longer a right when you come to Christ. And I left the program over and over. I wanted to go serve God in my own time. I was saved. I wanted to serve the Lord, but I wanted to do it half-heartedly. I didn't want to fully surrender. And after multiple times, I flipped the truck back and we went back up north to my old grounds, and I ended up flipping a company truck into a cornfield. And I told, because I was so drunk, and I told God, look, if you get me out of this, if I don't go to jail, I'll go back to Loving Hands. No ifs, ands, or buts. In my gut instinct, I knew this is where God needed me. This is where God wanted me. And I came back here, and since coming back here and surrendering my life, see, I wasn't surrendered the first times coming through the program. Since surrendering my life, I've learned that God didn't call me here to get off drugs and alcohol and go back in the world like NA and AA teaches you to. God called me to this ministry full time. Pastor Wendell's asked me to stay on his full-time staff for the past year. I've been resident director now. And God's began to implant in my spirit the vision he gave Pastor Wendell 30 years ago. And I now know that God is raising me up to take his place, to be his armor bearer right now, but even to take his place and extend Loving Hands farther out. He's already given me visions for starting a Loving Hands in Indiana, because this ministry is very few. There are very few ministries like this that are this intense. We're not supported by the government. No man is charged any fees to come into the program. So when drug addicts like I are hurt and they're struggling and they're at the rock bottom and have no money and nowhere else to go, they can come here. And And I came here strictly to get off drugs, yet God set me free and not only got me off drugs, but began discipling me through Pastor Wendell Wilson and has put his calling on my life and helped me to receive it and to see what my purpose is in this life. So we help men that are struggling with drugs and alcohol and come here just to get off drugs and alcohol, receive the call of God, and go out and be world changers for the kingdom of God. So God done a resurrecting power in my life. He's transformed my life. He's given me opportunities now to preach in many different places, and he's just continually working in my life. And I see just in the power of surrendering your life fully within a couple years how quick God can use you and put you out in the world to start making an impact for others.